They have the sizzle pages. They're the ones that your project manager is going to run to. And they're going to think that it's easy to do, and you just put in a couple things, you're going to get these responses back, and it's going to work. And then what happens is you build a POC, you get further and further along, and then you find out it doesn't scale. The parts that are black boxed you wish you had access to, which we're going to, like when we go through these pieces, you'll see this is why it's important. These are all the things that you will deal with when you're sort of vying for like, hey, what platform do I choose? And so that's another goal, is for me to show you like, this is why this is better. Especially being a .NET developer, you're 90% there, right? You just put the NLU piece in and you're ready to do conversational AI. One more thing, and I don't know if this is next, but we'll see. So the LUIS part, the LUISai cognitive services. The language understanding is what the LUIS part is. There's a lot of people get confused with this too. Watson and Lex and Dialogflow, they're all, I'm not 100% sure on Dialogflow, but they're connected in their NLUs and their framework. And you would be, again, you would be surprised at what people think that for LUIS being disconnected from the Microsoft bot framework means. People think that that means I can use LUIS and whatever chat function framework that I want, and it's going to work great. That's not the case. You will find that out. So there's a platform, for example, called Rasa. Rasa is a chatbot. Rasa is, and also they have an open source NLU. Open source seems great. They have a lot of features. They actually, I think that chatbot is framework is built in Python. So, you know, for a Python developer, they may find a Rasa bot, right, or the Rasa framework. The problem is that what they start to say is they'll say something like, hey, you can use LUIS with Rasa. And the whole idea of that is completely wrong. You should not want to do that. However, I think the purpose of Microsoft disassociating the NLU from the framework is that if you find a use case specifically for the NLU, you have that ability to do that. I don't think they meant it to be used interconnectedly to these other chatbot frameworks. If that makes any sense. So I just want to tell you the sort of the things that you will come across that will make your head scratch. Now, with that being said, LUIS is, I think, and there's some research out there, especially against Watson, for its natural language understanding accuracy. I think it's phenomenal. And I think this is the part of AI that works. If you're thinking about, if anybody here watches Westworld, if anybody's into that, they go through, if you're watching like how they do the dialogues, and it's basically like a tree diagram, right? Like I go here in the conversation and then I can go here. I go here in the conversation and now I'm here. And they organize that all together. This works pretty much the same exact way. And so the brains behind all of this is able to be accomplished with LUIS. LUIS is the brains. LUIS is the one who knows what you're saying. And then it also does the processing and says, this is what you said, and these are the parts and pieces that you want from that statement, that utterance, and here you go. And so that's how this is able to work, and it works pretty well. But like I said, the black box solutions, they will use some other type of NLU. They'll start putting things together like this chatbot or this store device and all these things. And to the user or the person who's sort of consuming all that, they don't really see that. So it's difficult to work with. But LUIS is fully open. You're able to fully work with it, and we'll get into that. So is the Q&A the same as LUIS? So the Q&A, and a lot of these frameworks have this ability, is that a Q&A is just simply, it doesn't really have to do a lot of NLU per se. It does NLU in a sense, in NLP, but it works against indexing. So it uses Azure Search. That's where the Q&A maker That's the leveraging that it really uses as Azure Search. And the reason why it does that is it does search indexing for, you give it a question, you still train it just like you would LUIS, and then you have an answer. And so you could have hundreds or thousands of those. The Q&A maker does all types of cute little things where it'll take like an FAQ from your web page and just embed it into the Q&A maker so that you have a single source of truth. So that's how the Q&A maker differs. Now, these services, and I know this is a .NET talk, but these services are all in Azure. Azure is the one who holds these resources. So these resources come from Azure. The framework comes from GitHub. It's open source. You can use it. You can go and see the code. And there's two main frameworks. Well, there's three. There's TypeScript, there's .NET, and then there's Node. Those are the three flavors that this framework comes in. Q&A, like I said, they have portals. And LUIS has a portal. Those, like I said, those are resource groups or resources that you get in Azure, and that's how you use this. Now, with that being said, is everything great in the cloud? No. Microsoft is probably the only company right now that actually attempts to address that issue. Is the plane, and this is not a pun, but if you're flying in a plane, is it in the cloud? No, right? It doesn't have full internet connectivity. You would not want that user experience. So you have these hybrid cloud solutions. What Microsoft has done, they've begun the process of decoupling some of these cloud things. It's called IoT Edge, Azure on the Edge, where you can put the LUIS container, it's a Docker container, and you can put that into a Docker container and it not be connected to the cloud. So what that does is it gives you, affords you the ability to do some NLP processing that isn't depending on the cloud. Here's the problem with that, as of right now. And you can imagine working on a cruise ship, it's the same problem. So here's the fight, or the hope, is that Microsoft continues to put some of these services that are not just in the cloud. When you have LUIS, there's things that attach to it. So one of the things that attaches to a natural language understanding is spell checker. That is super important, right? If people are typing and they have mistypings in their phone that are already pre-programmed for whenever they were using their phone, you're setting those utterances along. People say things differently, right? For example, how do you resolve Fort Lauderdale, Florida? Somebody could call that Fort Lauderdale. Somebody could call that FT Lauderdale. Somebody could call that Lauderdale, right? You have to account for all of that experience. The NLU, that weight is on there. So it's very important, but also additional things like spell checker, telemetry, analytics, those attach to all those things as well. So that's the, that's why I consider myself an architect, because you're responsible for all those parts and pieces. There's another part, and I think I might have forgot it, yeah. So I didn't put it on this slide, but there's the communication portion of the service. So you can think of this bot framework completely as a web API. You can completely think of it as a service. And all it's doing is routing things back and forth, right? So with that being said, there is a service that Microsoft provides called Direct Line. Now what Direct Line is, and we'll get into that, is a channel where the channel is, it has the ability to communicate with certain front end or certain clients. Examples of that are web, Facebook, Slack, right, Skype. Those are all various channels that you can connect this bot to, and it's how your bot would work on those channels. With that being said, most of all that comes out of the box for you, right? Especially even the web channel. You can literally just throw a JSON object at it, messaging object at it, and it's going to do all these things for you out of the box. But your solution may be completely custom. And so what's left is the direct line API. And the direct line API is the contract between the bot framework and the client. It's also a service. It's where your messages are, your user IDs, and all those things. As a bonus for enterprise, and if anybody's interested, I'll go into how you can possibly get around that, because you may not want to use their service for customer information, but you still need to communicate with the bot in some way. So there's that part of the bot framework. This here may be small to see. Can you guys see that? So the way I outlined this, and I'll put the slide on GitHub. I'll put the code samples on GitHub. I'll do that. But I wanted to go through sort of a utterance traveling situation. And it's just one of the things that I sort of thought of how you can use and what you would have to do to sort of think about the user experience. And I think the user experience here using the chatbot would be using LUIS to check on every answer that you receive. Now, you would not think, there's certain things when you start to do this that's not out of the box for you, and this is one of those things. So, and I'll give you an example. So it says, the bot says, how may I help you? And the person says, I'm looking to buy a luxury vehicle. So if anybody here works for a car salesperson, this would be perfect, right? This would be exactly what you would want to do. So, you want to buy a luxury vehicle. And so the intent is you want to purchase a car. That's how the intent works. So the NLU is going to extract out of that the intent, and it's purchase a car. Is what in the other information we can get from that utterance is what type of car. It's a luxury car. So when you think about how this process goes, you are now in a conversation where that person wants to purchase a car. So everything that you do further in that conversation has to deal with purchasing a car. Okay? You can't, this is AI, but this is not, the Matrix, right? This is not, there are confined limits of capability here. Now, those limits are pretty slick, and you can get around a lot of things. You can say cancel, or you can say help, right? And it'll interject you somewhere else so that you get that cancellation or the help. But you can't say, once you say I want to purchase a car, then context switch and be like, what's the weather today, right? It's not how the bot works. Once you get into that conversation container, there you're going for that, right? So now we have a lead question, want to purchase a car, and then we ask a question that has to do with the possibility of having a single intent, okay? This is something that you would have to code for. And this, you're not going to be able to do this in some black box solution, right? The fact that you can code this out is why you're able to achieve this. So what you can do is, the person says blue. That's extremely difficult for somebody to have context to what that is. Blue, what does that mean? What is that attached to? But what you can do is you can append the statement, car color, and then you can take their response, blue, and then you can get an entity that specifically deals with car color. And so you can use that one-word response. You can put that in a store, and you can keep that information, and later on through the conversation, you may recommend a car with these inputs. And that's how this stuff works. So I wanted to show you that these are some of the things that you have to kind of deal with when you're dealing with conversational AI. This is something that I have to deal with. So this, in this example here, red is the pain point. That's what red is, right? Red is the pain point. So what this bot does, and this is another use case, okay? You can say that you want to do a frequently asked questions, a Q&A, right? So what does that take? That takes you having a predetermined set of questions and answers, right? But what if you have a knowledge graph database and you want to utilize that knowledge graph database in order to come back with dynamic responses so that you don't have to formulate a question and answer for every possibility? So you can load up your knowledge graph, you can take an intent with entities, and you can go to the graph and come back with a response. And so you can use a database, you could use NoSQL or SQL or anything to actually do these calls or these queries so that you can get back, an answer or a response. And so that's another use case, and this is a pretty common use case for what these chatbots do. A lot of times, the previous slide that I showed you, that's the more difficult dialogue to have with a person, but it's very easy to do the win of like, where can I go find a car, and then you get some response and answer, and then that's pretty much the experience. It just loops back over again. Is everybody comfortable, or everybody get the idea of intent and entity yet? Everybody get that? Okay. One more coding thing that I want to get out of the way. And I find this because in Marriott, they're a Java shop, and any Java code that I ever worked in completely has no idea or abstraction of asynchronous programming. That is something that back-end developers are notoriously famous for ignoring and just not doing, right? So how many people here, they're really strong in the back end, do asynchronous programming? So you guys are all comfortable with that. I could pull out any Java code in Marriott right now, and it'd be synchronous from day to night. So what is the model in .NET that has to deal with asynchronicity? What is that model? But there's a name. It's 3 letters. It's an acronym. What'd you say?
Yeah. TPL.
No. It is the .NET Core newish preferred way on a single call to do async await. It's not separated. It's on the single. It's not a single thread, but it's a separated call. It's a single call, single method. You're going to get the async and the await. TAP, task-based asynchronous programming. Now, I said that because I want you guys to be all excited. I want you guys to get into this framework, and you're going to see this all over the place. And it's a big hurdle. I think for front-end developers, it's less of a hurdle to have to sort of grasp that. But for back-end developers, I've seen so much code that's just so synchronous that I think the concept is like abstracted. So what I have, before we dive into like the bot framework code, because that's all you're going to see, are some code samples that have to specifically do with tap. Is that cool with you guys? Okay. Now, also, I'm on a Mac. So the problem is when I develop at home, I use a PC. At work, I use a Mac, and I'm forced to use a Mac. So let's see if this ported over well, but we'll go into it. Because I was using LeakPad for this, which is like just easy to get out. All right. So first we'll go into some synchronous code and what that looks like. This is one page of code that has a bunch of timers in it to basically tell you this is your process, there's some delaying going on, and it's going to tell you how long it took to complete the action, right? And we're using seconds, but hypothetically we're converting that into minutes, okay? So the code it's not here. Hold on a second. No, I'm going to use VS Code. I'm going to use VS Code because it's in the same terminal. So I'm going to use VS Code. All right, let's see. Why is it doing that? All right, I know what to do. Just open a new window. All right, so we're going to start with the synchronous breakfast. So we're going to cook breakfast, right? And these processes are how long it takes you to cook something, right? That's the hypothetical. So, sure. The black background, is that? Yeah, let me increase the font size.
I like the black background when I'm working.
Is that bad still? Is that better? Okay. So, this is our little program. It's not much, right? But it's going to illustrate an important point. All right. So we're going to run this. We're going to run it again. So it took 10 minutes to complete the breakfast, right? And what it means is everything in this process was additive. It's synchronous. So when this is most of the code I see in the backend. It's just synchronous. Here's the problem, is that when you're building an API, that's not a good experience. You have to wait. These are all blocking processes. These all have to wait in order to finish from one to the next. You cannot do anything simultaneously. And what happens is the more you put these helpers and all these functions into your code base, you're never going to get the response that could be achieved with asynchronous programming. That's why Node, when, it's not the fact that .NET didn't do it or Java didn't do it, it just wasn't this common practice. And for Node, JavaScript's on that single thread, they had to deal with that, and that's where that sort of proliferated out of all these things. The two main points, because you can get into the weeds about why asynchronous is important or not. The two main take-home messages for asynchronous programming is this. One, you have the ability to wait until completion for a series of things to happen. So callbacks, right? One thing's not going to occur until the callback occurs. That's super important. In JavaScript, that's the same thing. The other super important thing is, and I want to ask this question, these aren't gotcha questions, they're just kind of to get your understanding in the right place, is that is all asynchronous code parallel and simultaneous? Does asynchronicity mean simultaneous? No, it doesn't. You can have synchronous code, and you can have code that is waiting for something else to happen in your asynchronous function. And the bot framework works extremely like this, right? You have a main conversation, dialogue, and then everywhere else you go, you're connected to that previous dialogue, right? That previous callback, that original function. And so that's when I show that. So now, this idea here would be, we're going to go and look at something that is synchronous. So now we're going to cook the same breakfast with the same amount of functions and the same time it takes to make everything. But now we're going to have the ability to do some simultaneous parallel function calls, right? So let me ask you a question. Do you think this code will fire off in parallel, or do you think it's going to fire off in sequence?
Parallel.
Why do you say that?
Taking the tasks rather than executing. It's taking the task and then doing something with it later rather than.
Exactly. It's firing off all the tasks now, and then the await is being fired off automatically from the beginning. If I put the await function underneath that task toast the bread async, then it would wait for that process to be done. And this is really where you can take a lot of your code today and make those improvements, especially for APIs. You can say like, hey, what are all the tasks that I need to do? And then I can fire those off, start them off in the beginning. I know they're going to complete. If not, I'm going to get some error or something back telling me, and it's not going to go forward, right? So let's just run this. So all of that same amount of work took only 4 seconds as compared to 10 seconds. You can imagine on a massive scale how much of an improvement asynchronous programming is. It is massively improvement. In your functions, even your big functions that you can still have synchronous code in your asynchronous function. But you should really, like if you're doing things in series, you should start thinking about, can I run these in task, right? Can I switch this up and do this differently? This is a hard abstraction for a lot of people, and I'll post these in the GitHub so that you guys can look at this. They're very simple examples, and once you see it, I think that a lot of you would start to do asynchronous programming, especially for web APIs. So let's go to LUIS. I need to make sure that I'm in mine. So let's start with LUIS. Yeah, this is my portal. So this is LUIS.ai. This is the portal, and these are application. You can think of these as models for what your bot framework would use in order to process parts and pieces of the conversation. There's something in there. Can everybody see that okay? There's something in there that's called dispatch. So the dispatch model, what that does is it connects multiple models together. So for example, you may have a Q&A maker, right? And also you have LUIS models that are your models for going through certain dialogues. And so basically what the dispatch would do is it would connect those together. So we'll go in here. So the models that are in here are home automation, weather, and the dispatch, which is basically a connection of all these put together, right? And so this one says for this Q&A that there's 6,000 utterances in here. How did 6,000 utterances get in there? You can add or append to your Q&A model like chit chat or some randomizing type response mechanism so that the user's not getting the same response all the time. Now, what I can do is I think it's this model right here, the question response sets. So, no, not that one. So these, when we test this, I'm trying to see what this model is. So because this is the Q&A model, there's no there are no entities with the Q&A model, right? It's just purely looking for the utterance, matching that, and then it does the index searching for the actual, like, in response to the answer. So the dispatcher does not provide you the response. The model does. I'm trying to just get, I think it might be in here. Oh wait, I found it. All right, so we'll look at one of these. So this is a user utterance. I'll edit this so that you can see it. So this is a way for you to basically, in this chatbot scenario, we're trying to book a flight. And so what we're doing is we're trying to get that we're booking a flight, that we're doing it from or to, and then also what airport, if you mention a city, what the associated airport code is with that particular city, right? So that's what these utterances do. So when you're designing your utterances, for every intent, and the intent here is called book flight, you only want about 10 to 15 utterances, right? If you need to extend the intent, then you should append it with a further category that can be used for something. So for example, say we wanted to build an...
A question on the previous screen.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the previous screen? So you have utterances, for instance, that says, I will be coming from airport. So is that, if I use coming from airport instead of typing in the whole sentence, is that more efficient?
Say that again?
So you have the whole sentence, right? I'll be coming from airport.
Yes.
So instead of that, if I just use coming from airport, is there a difference in how it acts based on that? Or?
Yes, I'll kind of show you that example. We'll be able to test that example out.
Okay.
So I'll be able to explain to you how you can cover all that very easily. And that's really important because I'll tell you why. One thing you have to consider about these models is that especially in the enterprise, you could have hundreds. I think in the bot that we currently have right now, there are 125,000 trained utterances. What happens when you have 125,000 anything? There's going to be some overlap. And so dealing with that overlap is very, very, very critical because you have to get what the user's intention was correct. And so that's what the purpose of these like sample utterances are, is so that we can hit this intent as accurately as possible. And that's what the purpose is. So let's test it. You said coming from airport, right? So you would say coming from Chicago. The confidence score or the match score is 87%, right? That's pretty effective. The problem is, like I said, it's not the fact that this is 87%. It's the fact that you may have something else out there that's 87 or 86%. It's super close to this. You go through, make some changes on your model, you hit train, guess what? You just flip these answers around. And that goes with the QA as well, the Q&A maker. So you have to consider all that. So if I type in, I'll be coming from the airport, does that give a better response? It gives a little bit of a worse response. You know why? I typed the word airport. It's not, it's not what I should have typed. I'll be coming from Chicago. That's 94%, right? We just went up, you know, and the 80 is not bad. That's not, but like I said, that's not the issue when you're considering this. It's the closeness that you have with everything else. So you can inspect this further. You can see what's published. And this is another good point, I guess, topic to bring up. When you create one of these services, there's versioning of your deployments. There's the concept of versioning, but there's not the concept of testing, stage, and production. This is the source of truth. So they give you, what's added in this service is the idea of testing, stage, and production. So you can, when I publish this, I can publish this to staging, and then I can test, or I can publish this, and then when I'm super ready, I can publish this to production. But you're doing it right from here. You're not doing it with two separate code bases. That's an important thing to keep in mind. So here, just want to go over this JSON object. So the intent that we got here, can everybody see that okay? Yeah. The intent that we got was booking a flight. It's 94%. The entity that we got out of here is, we know that it's from, because that's the, we can actually abstract that intention or that entity from compared to, which is important because when if you're going to actually book someone on an actual flight, you need to know that context. So we have from airport Chicago, and then there's all this other stuff down here below, right? In .NET, I can tell you right now, that is very difficult to get to. It is, JSON and .NET are not good friends. It's very annoying to get some of this stuff out of .NET. What you can do to get around it is you can print out your model and refer to your model versus the one that's in LUIS. But on a big model, that wouldn't be advisable. I will say that Node is much better at handling JSON. The reason why is sometimes you get this, sometimes you don't. I mean, it just varies depending on what your entity is, and you really may need that entity.
Do the intents come out as an array, or do they come out just as an object?
I'm sorry, what's that?
The intents object right there is book flights. It's like, so the intents is an object that contains another object, book flight that contains a score. Does intents come out as like a list, or does it just come out as a JSON object with random things indexed into it?
No, that's a good question. So I'll answer that in two ways. One is the framework has methods and classes that can extract your top intent, because the top intent is really all you need.
Okay.
You may want to compare other intents or print that out. Where it differs are entities, right? So entities, yes, you have the object. Entities are harder to deal with. And the reason is, it's not all the fact that it's like LUIS is bad at handling entities. It's how you design them. It's how you construct them. There's all different ways you can make an entity. An entity can be a pre-formatted list. An entity could be something random. An entity could have a hierarchy, right? Like a parent and child entity. You can have composite entities. All of these things you have to consider when you're constructing these utterances, so that you can get the entity object that you want and the intent object that you want. And that's a huge part of this, because when you're trying to extract something and go to a knowledge graph or whatever, you got to deal with like all of this stuff. So for example, in a knowledge graph, right, you need canonical lists, because if you're going to start relating data together, I need to know that the data that I'm matching things together from an utterance is very strict. So I'll give you an example of that. It's very tightly coupled. So here are entities, right? So the entities that we have for this model are airport, boat color, car color, all this different stuff, right? There's some pre-formatted ones. They're pre-built domain ones that Microsoft gives you, like time. Microsoft handles time extremely well, right? It'll extract, you could say the first Saturday in November 2025, and Microsoft will give you back the time of day for that. That's pretty awesome, right? And when you're booking a flight, that's an important feature to have. You don't have to build that out. That's there for you. There's some other ones too. But, so for example, I think airport is a list, that's a solid entity. Oh, it's the from. So the hierarchy is actually from and to. That's what we're going to see. So from, so this is a composite entity, right? So what that means is that, and I'll remove the composite so you can see how you add these things. So I'll take it off. What'd you say? I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Oh, I see.
Does anyone else do that where you think you're like, something will happen if you right click, and then sometimes it does? That's where we're at. Okay, remove the composite. All right. And then, damn it, it added it back on. Trying to, it's automatically adding it on because it knows. You know what? Let's just do a new intent.
Just try to see it for yourself.
Yeah. So that's actually my bad. The reason why that I couldn't do it from there is because that's not the intent. That was just an example of the intent. So, okay, so travel to perhaps Paris. By the way, there are APIs for all of this, right? You can load in JSON. You don't have to deal with this front-end portal. I will say this, that a lot of this type of stuff will come from your project managers, your leaders, right? That's who may want to be in here and have access to this. Your QA, people. So it's very friendly and convenient in that manner. So, all right, let me just switch it. So it switches to car color. Let's just assume that the word here is Berlin, but I really want this to be the airport, right? Now, the normalized value is the synonym that belongs to that airport code, for example. And in here, we're going to attach this airport, which is a specific name, Berlin, that we have in the list. So there's no way for the person to escape it. If they say Berlin, they're getting this entity. So the other part is we're going to put the composite entity, and it's going to be to, right? Because this should be travel to that entity. So this gives us the broader context. So now we made a change, we train our model. And training is like, you can consider that as development mode. That's how you can basically consider that. Publishing is staging and production. That would be that. So this is training across the cloud, right? And I don't know how the connectivity is, but that would play into that. Your endpoint prediction, your prediction endpoint, which is hitting this service, is also crossing across the cloud. All right, so we trained it. We go in and we test it. So I'll say travel to perhaps Berlin, and we get a 97% match, right? Now I'm going to compare this with what's published. And so we go over here, and the same thing, right? It was a 2 entity. The text is Berlin, so it's pretty much the same. There's not really a difference there. And then everything is the same. Now, the purpose of this trained model, and the reason why you only do 15 utterances, is that we can relatively get to the same place by saying anything that somebody would want. So give me some response that you would want to see processed of you traveling to some city. What'd you say? Non-stop flight. Let's type it in, see what it says. I can tell you that I do not have that trained, right? There's no, it knows that booking a flight is the intent that it's going to give you, but it's not very accurate. What else might coincide with this?
I need to fly to Chicago.
So here, we know that we're booking a flight. That's a little better. We know that the airport, we have the entity, we actually extracted out of here because it's in the list, and it's the airport in Chicago. Now my concern with that would be 66% is kind of low. I'd want to see, especially for intents, I think you should strive for probably 90 and above. The way that you do that is there's a way that you can do a catch-all, and I'll show you this. So this right here, this is like, when somebody's comparing an NLU, this is the moneymaker right here. Like this is like, you can't get better than this. Now, do other NLUs do this? I haven't seen it. But this makes not only your entity extremely more accurate, but it displaces everything else and moves it out the way. So you have no collisions or no overlapping, right? It's really powerful. So what was the utterance you just gave me?
I need to fly to Chicago.
I need to fly to Chicago. So Chicago is what? Chicago is, we know that's an entity, right? So what type of entity was that? It was airport, right? Okay. So I need to fly to some airport. We know that we're going to stick a pattern in just for that. So actually, what type of real entity was this? It was a composite entity, right? Yeah. And we knew that it's 2, so it's 2. 2 is really what it is. That's really, it's a composite entity that's 2 to the airport. We're going to see how this works. I'm not sure if we can work with composite entities. I need to fly. What's a variation of saying I need to fly to?
I have to fly to.
I have to fly to. So you can do this. Is that good grammar? I need to fly to? Yeah, I think it's fine. We'll test that. So I need to fly to. Really doesn't matter, right? The user can say anything. What else? What would be another variation? I want to fly to? You can give me a little more complicated ones than that. It doesn't have to follow. It should in a roundabout way it should follow this, but it can be different in a couple levels.
Is it a phrase or the little variations of that?
This is the variations of the phrase. So let me.
Like to fly to?
I'd like to fly to. I need, have, want.
Hankering?
Are you hungry? That was. It was.
Hankering for fly.
Oh, anchoring.
Hankering for a flight. There you go,
See how much
guys.
it goes to a city not flying.
Yeah, what a go-to.
What was the I'd what?
I like.
I'd like. Trying to make sure we catch this. Let me see. It's not regex completely. There's limits.
I'm saying it's like a
It is like a regex, yeah.
for phrases.
It's there's limitations. You can nest too deep, which is pretty powerful. And if you mathematically figured this out in a way, I mean, man, you're covering like a lot of user utterances that are super accurate. This is a really powerful way to do this. So all right, let's test this and see if we actually hit the pattern, because I want to see if the composite NT actually works. Oh, my bad. Hold on. So you got to actually do something with this. So book a flight. It's 2. All right, so let's do that. Now we did not train an utterance for what you said. We did not do that. And it was low, right? It was like 66%. All right. I need to fly to. I'm going to try to switch that around and see if. You can see if you're hitting your pattern. You don't have to like kind of imagine it. It'll tell you. There you go. That just went to 100% match just for that utterance. It hit the pattern. So what that means is that any variation that comes in there, 100% match, or like 97 and above, and everything else that would even be close to that would be set out of the way, right? So, and again, as far as NLUs go, like LUIS is a great one. Like there's no doubt about that. So 2 things, I'm gonna speed up a little bit. I wanna show you the Q&A maker. No, I already did show you the Q&A maker, right? So this is our Q&A model. This is another service that's hosted in LUIS or hosted in Azure that you would set up a resource group to and refer to your endpoints from there. I think this is where that chit chat stuff was. Yeah, that makes sense. That's why there's 6,000 entries. It's from here. That's where this is from. So while this is loading, the important distinction to make here is that the dispatcher, in order to use, you either use just one model, but if you want to combine more than one model, you have to use a dispatcher. The dispatcher is kind of annoying because you have to maintain it separately than your other models in LUIS. So what happens is your dispatcher is one source of like utterance truth, but if you start changing your models underneath that, the dispatcher can become decoupled from that. So what you have to do is you have to re-dispatch the dispatcher. So that's hopefully, I think at Ignite, which is coming up soon, Microsoft does something with that. It's pretty annoying, actually. Why is this not working? Maybe I didn't pay the bill. I don't know. I will say this, these services are very expensive. Like, they're not cheap. I have a bot just sitting there and it costs me like $100 a month. It's like ridiculous. Oh, here we go. So, so this response, what's in a name? Apparently because I don't have one, right? So who do you think this is? Who's responding here? The bot, yeah, it's true. I think it's like Cortana stuff. Give me another variation or something, like some quirky question, chit chat.
What do you need for a living?
Yeah, this is like Cortana. That's where I think this is from. These are like the same. If anybody had a Windows phone, play with Cortana, I think these would be the responses. Like Siri, right? It's something like that. You can mix this model in with your real model. And the purpose of that is that people, and this is true, when you get real data from human beings, they will say anything. You're stupid, you're dumb. They want to see what the bot does. And that's kind of like an important aspect too. What's a bad use case for a chatbot? In Alan Turing, right? What's the Turing? Everybody familiar with the Turing test? What's the tenet of the Turing test? That if I can trick you and you think that I'm a human, then the Turing test, right? You passed it. But if I'm in a bot situation, and this is a bad user experience, and I feel like I'm talking to a human, and the context switches to where I say something, and all of a sudden, I don't know what's being said, and I figure out like, oh, this is not Sally, this is bot, right? That makes you mad. That is a very bad user experience. So you want to protect against that and make sure there's an awareness that this is what that is, right? Your agent or your virtual agent or whatever, or however you contextualize it. You shouldn't make someone believe that they're talking to a human and all of a sudden they're not. It's not a good user experience.
Is there a way to, if they stray outside of the conversation, to have a canned response saying, oh, can we go back to talking about blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, so this is what you're saying. And you have to code for that. And I'm gonna try to get into one. I know you guys are probably hungry. I'll buy you all a beer, or anybody who wants to have a beer, I'll buy you guys a beer. But I want to get into like one kind of code sample. And to answer your question, this goes back to the user experience, right? The UX UI, and the way that you protect and code for that is that if a user says something, say that what are you expecting? That would be the question. So if you say to the person who's going through the dialogue, and you say, what color car are you looking for? And they say, well, that's a stupid question. right? They could say that. So guess what? There's no color entity that came from there. I did not achieve my goal. So what you can do in that promise statement is you can say, I want a color entity. And if that's false, repeat the question over again. And you just keep asking them the same question. Or you could give them a variation of the thing. Be like, hey, I need a color of the car. An example of a color would be blue, right? You could put them in their place in that conversation container. And so that's why like code is so much better than these black box solutions that they wouldn't be able to handle that because they can't do that same thing. So you can protect and have these, you know, constraints and make sure you get data points that you want by doing that. And they're called, so that's the next point. So let's go into code example. Not that one. If I wasn't being streamed, I'd go into that one. It's a little joke. Okay, I think this is the one. So, all right, let's pull this up. Also, let me are you guys okay with the time? That's fine. Let me go into Azure to show you guys this. Yeah, I have one resource group. Let me tell you, do you guys use Azure? So Azure, like they have continuous development, and like, man, it can really throw you off. And so one of the things that you have to do when you deploy something like a web service, you have to have an app registration, because I wanted to kind of deploy like brand new bot, do all that and connect to it, but I'm not doing app registration right now. So I wonder if I killed all my bots. Yep. Well, let's see if it works. Yeah, I don't think this one's working. But no worries. What I wanted to show you in here is the channels part. That's what I wanted to get to anyway. So in this part, like of Azure, these are the channels. This is all the direct line channel mostly, and every one of these other channels. So if you want to hook up your bot to Facebook, Slack, all these things over here, email, straight to the web, and we'll go into that part. I wrote, if anybody uses Angular, I wrote an Angular integration for the Microsoft bot. It's because it was designed for React, and it's just a web thing. So, but anyway, these channels are what control you connecting to those devices. All right. The way you can develop your bot though is like this. So here we are, and this is the bot code, and then we have the emulator. Okay. Now the emulator is a fake direct line channel that emulates being the web, and that's how you can debug it. So what I'll do is, to make sure this is started. Yeah, I think it's the right one. So can you see that okay? So I'll start this over. Pretty sure I don't have any Microsoft App ID that I need in here. But once you deploy your bot to cloud, you have to use that App ID from then on out, or you have to remove it so that you can use the bot. So here I can say this is like sample bot, and I'll say, and I want to show you this. I can't really make that bigger. But if you could read that, it says, what can I help you with today? Say something like, book a flight from Paris to Berlin on March 22nd. So what's going on here is I'm going to say, I want to book a flight to Paris. Now, this says, I didn't get what you're saying. So what's going to happen is in the code base, we have a main dialogue. And in that main dialogue is the beginning of all of our dialogues. So you cannot escape the main dialogue. And in fact, when one dialogue finishes, its completed end, then it's going to go back to the main dialogue, right? So here, this main dialogue is going to kick off all these waterfall dialogues. And this is what I mean by these are all asynchronous, right? So all these we're going to run, we're going to have an intro step. In the intro step, we're going to hook up our LUIS portion, right? And we're going to have these contexts, right? From one step to the next. So instead of waterfall, you can think of sequence of steps, right? So these sequence of steps go from one to the other. And until you see something that is so here, what is this one doing? This is replace dialogue. So replace dialogue, what that's doing is that's repeating the loop over again. So that's what will happen is you would basically just start over again, over and over and over again. But we also can call other dialogues from here. And so this is how we go into, like, if we're a tree branch, this is how we go to the other branches of the tree. So here, the booking dialogue is this dialogue here, right? And what that does is it starts to use the destination and the origin steps. So that's the purpose of this, what this dialogue is. And it's going to prompt you, it's going to say, what city would you like to travel? So if we go back to the emulator, all right, so this is the problem with this bot. The problem with this bot is we have the wrong LUIS ID. That's the problem with this bot. So what I need to do is go back to LUIS and connect to the right app. All right, so we're going to use this app. So what you would do, so these are all the resource groups that you get from Azure. This is like a free one. If you started a new bot right now, they make you do the authoring resource and the endpoint prediction resource together. So just something to be aware of. But I need to get some information from here. So this is my primary key. Sorry, I need the app ID. Need the key. And here's the region. I think that's fine. All right, let me restart that and see if it works better.
Question, let's end at minutes or so.
Sure. Oh, I gotta restart this. So I think this particular bot that I've hooked up is not the correct one. Yes, hold on 1 second. I think I can do this in 10 minutes if you want to see it. And did anybody have any questions, or you guys are kind of like phased out?
Yeah, so I noticed everything, your code is all JavaScript. Is that, you said TypeScript? Java?
This is TypeScript.
Oh, that is TypeScript, okay.
Sorry. Wait, no, you're right. This is JavaScript. Yeah. I'm going to go to a TypeScript one. Go ahead.
Yeah, but you have C# also as an option?
No, yeah, C# is the primary SDK, for
Okay.
sure.
And then
Yeah.
I have another question. So I'm trying to get my head around this. So you went and trained a bunch of models using a nice UI. Is it then that you take those models and you use your C# or whatever code to then say, hey, that model helps me determine the context of what they wanted?
Yes.
And then based on that, I run through a condition to go open up another, what you call a dialogue then?
Correct.
And then you're using more models to then.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to end it with this code example, and that should answer your questions.
Okay.
Yeah. This is TypeScript. This is a TypeScript model. Let me open it up real quick. This bot should not be broken. We have the flight thing in there. This should be fine. So start this over. Man. This is not anything. So I have the right intent, but why is it complaining? So to answer your question, this LUIS recognizer to what's being extracted from the utterance, that's what that part is. So here, what Microsoft calls anything that's processing something on the NOU statement, they call it a recognizer. This can be a range of a lot of different things. It's almost like a saga, but it's basically just something that's processing more information from the utterance. And so this recognizer, it gets instantiated, it gets with its configuration, which is the model that we put in there, or the credentials, and then it extracts out the query, right? So in the emulator, we know the intent was to book a flight, so this should have passed through, and I needed to see why. I think I know why. No. So there's something wrong with my LUIS model that's not correctly allowing the code to pass through. But that's the general idea, is that the flow, the waterfall, the dialogue is the main dialogue and then the booking dialogue. And then once you're passing through, you don't need the NLU everywhere. You just need it, in this particular case, was the opening statement.
So the main dialogue was where you're trying to determine the intent. And then
Correct.
They want to book.
Correct.
You're going to hop over to
Booking dialogue, correct.
Where you're going to recognize a few more questions.
Yeah, in the booking dialogue, so what happens in this flow, like what's supposed to happen, is that you recognize the intent, which it did that, but then it says, okay, I need you to go book. But what it's doing, because it uses a state model, so there's state throughout this process. So what happens in state is that it knows, okay, I got to Paris, but you didn't tell me where you're coming from. So guess what? I need to go through and see whether or not you gave me that information. If you did, I'm going to ask you for it. That's how it's set up. That's how it works. I do not have the right LUIS model in here, and that's why it's not working. I had an old one.
The UI you were using to interact with, is that something you built, or?
This emulator?
Yeah.
No, this is a part of the framework.
Okay.
Yeah, so for in here, for example, and just to kind of show this, the telemetry that's in there, this is the LUIS trace. So this gets all of that information. I really don't know why this is working. But so this is basically saying, like, here, once I want to fly to Chicago from Paris, I can go do a trace, and I know that the airport, Chicago, from, that's the airport, the from is Paris, Chicago, and all that. Yeah.
So is there like a way to like interact with LUIS that you would just send it like just a JSON object as like a query and it would respond back to you? Is there like some of that service that you can use?
So say that again. You would say.
So like, so say you don't want to interact with it using your like chat thing. So you wanted to like have a application sitting on the web, like getting a webhook back from like WhatsApp, and you want to take that content you get from WhatsApp and feed it into LUIS, have that come back to your web service, and then fire back off through WhatsApp back to your user. Can you do that?
Yeah, you could do it because LUIS is decoupled. So you could theoretically definitely do that. You would get back that JSON. You'd have
So
to
it's
do
just
something.
like a REST web service, basically.
Exactly. Like you'd have to do something with that
Gotcha.
once you get that return. But yeah, you could do that. Yeah. Any other questions?
Where do you actually use, I mean, is this actually something that you have in real life? Did you say you work for Royal Caribbean? So like, where is, what was that restaurant? It's
Chops. Yeah.
Is that actually a real thing?
Yeah, it's real there.
So if I go to I'm going on a cruise next week.
Which cruise line?
Royal Caribbean.
Oh, so which
The Symphony out of the Canal?
Symphony doesn't have it.
It doesn't have
It's-
chops?
No, it has chops. It doesn't have
What?
the chatbot.
Oh, man.
But so you want to
You know what? Forget the cruise.
but Allure has it.
Allure?
Allure has it. Yeah. Symphony has some other stuff on there. We're actually going to deploy Symphony with this. But yeah.
So this is real stuff that actually Royal Caribbean is really doing, right?
Not this. Don't look at that. that's just a sample.
It's ingrained into your app. Essentially.
What'd you say?
You probably have like an app that you use that's ingrained into that, or is it?
You mean for Royal Caribbean? Like the real user experience? Yeah, there's a virtual concierge app.
Okay, cool.
And that is used for chatting and doing other things.
And is that using LUIS?
As of this moment, no. This is all something we're in development. There's a different chatbot.
I got you, okay. You're going there.
We're going there, yeah. And all the things I told you are real experiences, yeah.
With LUIS, how do you handle multilingual?
That's a good question. LUIS handles multilingual very well. It has language text analysis analyzers. It'll detect what language you're doing. There's a sample for that you can actually code with. Your big languages, Spanish, Chinese, like Italian, French is all there. And not only just LUIS, but also the Q&A maker. So you can design, it'll recognize the language coming in, it'll detect it, and it'll know to respond, based on that context. So if you notice in the Q&A in LUIS, for some reason the Q&A is slow. But here, you see all these cultures? This is all English US. So you would have a model that would be the exact same thing, you would culture it to something else.
Localize models.
You'd have to have individual models, correct? Yes.
You can't have like one model and say.
No, yeah, that would be crazy. You have Spanglish.
So, like in terms of scaling, like let's say put this on a website, is that handled by Azure? Like you just provision saying that I want to use this many resources, and if it exceeds this, just throttle it, or does it automatically scale as millions of users land on it at the same time? How does that?
No, that's a good point. No, in Azure, yes. In Azure, yes, you have that capability with your everything. So when you deploy the bot, whether it's TypeScript or C#, you're deploying it into a web service container. So everything that would come from that would be the same. So all your horizontal scalability processes would be the same thing. We're good?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm going to debug why that bot didn't work.
And now we need, I guess.
So, well, I really want, what's the best way to get started?
Okay, so let me, I didn't show,
And we can talk about it over